The Ukrainian armed forces gain additional ground in Kursk while they are sending a fresh brigade that is considered to be one of their stronger brigades to Pokrovsk to stem the tide there as the Russians keep advancing in the Donbass. We'll talk about this as well as about international aid, where the US once more said that they are not going to send contractors to help Ukraine, especially with its F-16s, and there is more information coming out about the downed F-16 or the crashed F-16 that killed a lieutenant colonel of the Ukrainian Air Force. We'll have more details about this, but as said, we'll talk about this, about the international aid, developments along the front line, and much more in this situation report about the war in Ukraine. We'll start off with this reported airstrike against a supposed drone factory in Sumy. Now, I have no way of confirming whether that was a drone factory or not, but it seems an appropriate time to talk about targeting and about loose lips sinking ships. If you watch international reports about Ukraine, especially, for instance, about the drone factories, but often enough even about repair facilities for war material, all too often you see the faces visible on the pictures, on the videos. You see details inside of the factories, like a structure of the roof, like window designs, things like this that are thus visibly connected to a certain facility. Now, in times of the 21st century, especially our current year, you have software that can scan the internet, that can scan social media to look for clues, to search for certain designs and for faces. A single picture of somebody visiting Kiev taking a selfie in front of a subway station can already show that this person is leaving the subway station at a time where it's probably going to work. A picture where the person leaves a house already gives an indication that either in this house is probably the place where the person lives or the facility, and details like this in our times will already help the Russians find targets to identify items like this. This is one of the things whenever I watch something from Ukraine where I'm reminded of the propaganda from World War I and World War II, loose lip sinks ships, and I see this happening here again. This is one of the ways the Russians identify targets, and we continue to see international media highlighting, showing faces, allowing the Russians to identify who works in a drone factory and thus recreate the areas where that factory might be. Certain window designs, for instance, that aren't blurred might be compared with Google Street View, and thus they might be characteristic for certain buildings, for certain areas. All of this nowadays is a big puzzle, and with software aid, it can help to the Russians finding their targets. We'll go to the developments of the front line now. Here we have a video of a Russian column being destroyed. I'll have it quickly here in twice the speed. And what you can see here is trucks being destroyed. And this is a pontoon bridge. And this is one being burned out. And all of this, it moves forward. They're continuing. And we can see here where it reaches a bridge. Now, this is supposedly the bridge at Svanoe. And you can see here this is an auxiliary bridge that is usually laid by bridge layers to help the Russians continue crossing over this. At least it was said this is supposed to be Svanoe, even though the river looks kind of small to me to supposedly be the same river. So I'm not completely sure here. But we see that the Russians try to keep the roads open over the same river to supply the 2,000 to 3,000 men that are cut off down here. And according to Russian mill bloggers, there's another circle here being cut off with the bridges where, for instance, this might actually be from. But while the Russians try to keep it open, we see the results of the Ukrainian strikes. You see parts of pontoon bridges having disassembled here and drifting down the river after strikes have hit them, which we can see in this video here. You see HIMARS still being employed against the Russian bridges. So as of now, we have no change here in the Glushkovo pocket. But it is expected that the Russians in the long term will have no way of keeping that area supplied sufficiently, but we'll have to see how it goes, how it continues. Then we have a geolocation, a fresh one, of the Ukrainians being in Cherkassia Konopelka. This is a new fresh geolocation, and Cherkassia Konopelka. Let me quickly check where it is. Yeah, it's right southeast of Sucha, in an area that was previously considered to be a gray zone. We see the straightening of the front line, so the Ukrainians are now in here as well. We've had them so far entering the town here, but not controlling it. We can expect that the real front line is probably somewhere like this now. I'm not sure about this town, but we see the Ukrainians still occupying additional settlements, even though we see the whole speed of the operation slowing down. That's it from the Kursk region. We switch over to the northern front line in Kharkiv, and while there are a couple of engagements being reported, both in the western as well as in the eastern part, I do not see any significant change in territory that I can report. So let's switch over to the Eastern Front. Here we have news about Sinkivka, and that news is that while the Russians have managed to raise their flag, as we can see here, at the same time the the settlement is still not fully controlled by the Russian forces. There's one more street to take. We talked about it in the last situation report that the Russians have raised their flag roughly here, and that in the south of the river there's another road of that settlement where the Ukrainians might still be, and it seems to be the case. We have the Russians confirming this as of now. Further to the east, the Russians have advanced at Pischane. They gained that forested area here and managed to advance further south by several hundred meters here, and they also managed to take the town of Stelmachivka. We have the geolocation here, that they have taken it, and it is at this point. I'll have to look for it. Yeah, it's right southeast of it. We see the Russians advancing in this. It's not visible on the map with its name, but this is Stelmachivka. And here again, you see the Russians advancing both here as well as here. We can clearly see what they seem to be intending, that is to close this. And if they manage to advance further, the Ukrainians will not really have a choice other than withdrawing towards the southwest. We go to the south. No more changes north of the Seversky Donetsk. South of the Seversky Donetsk, we have further fighting around Seversk. No change. In Chasiv Yar, I have a fresh geolocation of the Russians trying to advance along this area, but no success. They hold positions here at the end of the tree line, but Ryhorivka is mostly or completely still under Ukrainian control. There's also geolocations of the Ukrainians still operating in the full western part here, and with tanks and shooting over to the other side. This one video unfortunately ends with the Ukrainian tank being taken out, but we see the Ukrainians still holding the river or the canal line here at that point, so no change can be recorded. Further to the south, the general assessment is that Druzhba has probably fallen as of now. While I have not seen the proof, I have seen from more or less reliable sources that supposedly all of this here is now under Russian control. We had it last time in the situation report that the Russians had already advanced up to here, so it was to be expected that the Russians would take the last few hundred meters here, and according to reports, this has happened as of now. Further to the west, I have no change in New York as of now, but further in the Pokrovsk region, the situation is continuing to worsen. According to reports, the Russians have now taken full control over Novorodivka, occupying the last few rows of houses to the northwest. That was to be expected, especially with them being in control of that pit here of the what is it called? What you dig out from mines. It creates an artificial hill here, allowing them control over the surrounding areas. They were already here in the railroad yard for the mine, so it was to be expected that the Ukrainians would no longer be in the northwest, and we see that being confirmed as of now. Further to the south, we have the proof now that Karlivka has fallen. In the last situation report, I showed you that the Russians were already here, and you see on the deep state map that they even show that they attribute now a massive area freshly to the Russians. We have a geolocation, at least for part of it. Here they are now in the southeast. This is here already deeply inside of what the pro-Ukrainian deep state map hands over to the Russians according to their map. The Russians are also on the banks, on the outskirts of Dolinivka here to the west, and they are already in the northern part of Halytsinivka. We have a geolocation for this as well. This is Halytsinivka, and here we have Karlivka. You see that the Russians are already in the built-up areas here. So this is probably more or less how the front line is moving. They have advanced significantly further to the south as well. That was the last change in territory that I have. I have no change further, so we are not going to waste our time by listening to me mispronouncing Ukrainian names. We'll go over to the overall situation, and here Forbes reports that the Ukrainians are deploying a National Guard brigade that is one of their few offensive brigades, one of the brigades that is equipped with heavy weaponry and capable of offensive operation. It's the Karadak brigade that has T-64s, and they have been sent to Pokrovsk to slow down the Russians or to stop them. At this point, we spoke in the past about Pokrovsk being a railroad hub and a road hub. So while the loss there might be somewhat compensated, it's definitely a much bigger hit to the Ukrainians than the loss of any other town in the southeast, except maybe for Avdiivka, as it will play a negative role towards the lines of communications along the whole front line in the southeast of the war zone. Then we have the report that the president has decreed, the Ukrainian president has decreed that the commander of the Air Force has been dismissed. This has happened, 2 days after a loss, or 2 or 3 days after the loss of the first F-16. This led to immediate conclusions that it must have been because of friendly fire, that the F-16 was downed with friendly fire. There were rumors quite early. A member of the parliament said that a Ukrainian Patriot battery took down the F-16 with its pilot in a friendly fire incident, and obviously it would be the mission of the Air Force to properly organize everything that this can't happen, especially as a pilot like this, an experienced pilot, one of the very few who has already received training on that plane, is already lost at this point. 1 out of 6 pilots is already lost. The plane might be expendable. The pilot definitely is not. So this was a big hit to the Ukrainian Air Force, and the commander has been dismissed. Now, according to this, they claim, the defense minister says, no, it's normal rotation. You can decide to believe this or not. The proximity of both events, the dismissal of the Air Force commander and the loss of the first F-16, is quite obvious. And we have here in the New York Times, they are saying a Western official who has been briefed on the preliminary investigation of the crash said that there were indications that friendly fire from a Patriot missile battery might have brought down the jet, though mechanical failure and pilot error have not been ruled out. This would mean that a friendly fire is the most likely reason, and obviously for that somebody is responsible, and this might have led to the dismissal of the Air Force commander. In troop generation and troop developments, we have news from the Russians. They sent 100 soldiers or mercenaries fighting in the Bear Brigade that is deployed in Burkina Faso. 100 of them have left Burkina Faso to be deployed in Kursk. We see that they even redeploy small units like this to help stem the tide in Kursk, to change the situation here. This comes in at the same time where even official Kremlin affiliated Soviet institutes said that the trust in Putin has taken the biggest hit in newest history from one survey to the next one because of the Kursk offensive. We see that they even sent 100 men from Africa to there, despite that probably hurting their foreign policy goals. The Bear Brigade has 200 to 300 men that is working together with a military junta in Burkina Faso, and now it's being halved in strength to help with the Kursk region. And the Ukrainians are reporting that the Russians have used a new jet-powered drone in their latest attacks. As you can see, it has a jet engine. The interesting part here is it has neither a warhead nor sensors. The Ukrainians think it's being used to overwhelm the Ukrainian air defense, as the Ukrainians have no way of understanding whether that radar echo that they see is dangerous or not. Actually a pretty smart thing to do for them if the jet engine is not too expensive. The flight pass doesn't have to even be programmed. If they put it more or less in the right direction for the Ukrainians, it will be a choice to ignore those while they might carry weapons or not. And we see the Russians doing this now to overwhelm the Ukrainian air defense. Another development here that shouldn't be too surprising, as the Ukrainians have become pretty good at taking down the Shahed drones. We now see the Russians reacting to this as well. And we have international aid. The Romanians are saying in very soon the Patriot system they have promised Ukraine is going to be given to them. So another Patriot system will arrive in Ukraine, and Germany is reporting that among the promised and announced aid, Germany usually announces it first and then delivers. And now in the fresh delivery, another IRIS-T SLS system has been developed, among other things. For instance, 14,155 millimeter shells. Germany usually does small lots, but a lot of them. Another ARV, for instance, the Bergepanzer II, assault rifles, ammunition, and other small items. So a fresh aid, and I guess from the German aid package, the 14,000 shells and the IRIS-T are the most important. And bad news from the US, because while we have here again an article from the Wall Street Journal that while there is support for sending aid to Ukraine, the government is here. We have President Biden, led by his national security advisor Jake Sullivan, was concerned the Defense Department lacked adequate plans to respond should those people come under attack. The idea was floated before that the US would allow US contractors to help in Ukraine. Obviously, the US has probably several hundred pilots. The US alone probably has several hundred pilots that have recently retired in the last 5 to 10 years from flying F-16s that could still help Ukraine with flying, but they should have even more ground crew that is well versed, well experienced in the maintenance, and some of them might have volunteered to help the Ukrainians keep the planes running, but apparently the US government does not want to help the Ukrainians in this regard. But that was it already for today's situation report. It's a little shorter, as yesterday's already covered a lot of things that otherwise could have been said for today, but I'm pretty sure you will appreciate it for this time not being 30 minutes as so often. So if you like the situation report, despite the topics, despite the bad news for Ukraine in some regards, please give it a thumbs up. It helps with the algorithm. Leave your comment in the comment section if you have something to add. And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. If you want to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. So thank you very much to everyone already helping me. And that's it from me for now. So thank you for watching, and I'll be back.